Hey, welcome, Alan. Two
Welcome,
Voice
Mark.
Devs.
Two Voice Devs. How's it going?
It's a crazy week. It's election week. It's the final ramp up to the U.S. Presidential and everything else election, right?
Yeah, no,
But
big stuff. It's an important week. We used to talk about election day, and now it's election week, and I like it.
yeah, I think there's still some ramp up to the final election day, but then it's going to probably take some time to get the final results in. So just a little bit of patience on that side of things. Um,
No,
I voted by mail. Have you voted yet, Alan?
I have not voted yet. Voting in New York State just opened, but probably by the time this airs, I will have voted.
Well, good.
So,
So, I'm not going to say one way or another. You can probably search my
yep,
Twitter and figure out where I'm leaning on my vote, but that doesn't really matter other than the fact that I encourage you to get out and vote.
I agree.
So I stand up for your right to vote for whoever you choose.
I certainly have preferences, but most important, I think, is that we all get out and we make sure we express ourselves using the democratic process, using the tools that we have.
We need to pick our representatives, not just president, but all the way down to into Congress and to your state and local leaders as well.
Yep.
We'll find out, I guess, soon enough how this all turns out.
Hopefully, by the time our next show airs, we'll at least have an idea what's going on.
We'll see.
We'll see.
Let's hope that's the case.
One of the fun things to keep in mind is, we talk about knowing who the winner is on election night. And yet it's only been within the past few decades that was really what we were able to do. For most of our country's history, it took months to know who actually won the elections.
No, you're right. And I'm encouraged by this election that there are so many more people that are participating. There's in the past, there's been huge chunks of the voting population that have chosen not to vote at all. And so the fact that we have so much going on with early voting, I'm encouraged. I'm glad that people are getting involved.
I agree. I'm very encouraged. I'd like to see people out and participating.
Yeah. So what should we talk about today?
Well, I was thinking last time that we talked, we talked about our development environment, and we both kind of at the beginning of that hinted that the environment that we use today is kind of built on our recent developer history, what we've been doing the past decade or so. But I know both of us have been developing for even longer than that. So I thought it would be fun to kind of talk about, how did we get started with computers? And how did that bring us to where we are now? Because, one of the neat things about this industry in general is that everyone comes in with different backgrounds, with different paths into the industry, but it all shapes us. It shapes where we, how we got here and what we do now that we're here. And I think that's important. That kind of diversity is really what's great about our industry, I think.
Yeah, and the fact that your path is different than my path is different from somebody else's is awesome. I think
it is awesome. And it means that, when we cross paths, we've got these different experiences that we can bring to the table and share and exchange and create something even greater coming out of it.
Yeah, no, I agree. I don't know, do you want to share a little bit about your history first?
So I've now been working with computers for 3/4 of my life. At this point, I think I realized. And the first computer I owned was a Commodore PET. In fact, it is, I can show it to you behind me now. It is that exact Commodore PET.
Hey.
That I used decades ago now. And, I think at the time I saw it in terms of, little fun things that I could do. And pretty quickly I had people starting to say to me, things like, well, you've got a word processor there. Why don't you type your papers? And that kind of dawned on me that, there's practical elements to this. It's not just fun and games. It's, I can write my papers on it and then have to convince my teachers that, yes, I was the one writing the paper. The computer wasn't writing the paper. So it was, trying to help people understand the technology and where the level of technology was. Where did you get your start?
So my first computer I received probably about the age of 15, early 1980s, Texas Instruments 99 4A computer. So our
That was
family
a
didn't
fun one.
have, yeah, our family didn't have a lot of money. And so the fact that it was, I think it was like a $99 Christmas special, was something that, that finally fit our family's budget. And I'm so glad that it did, because got the manual out and started learning how to program BASIC, and stayed up all that, that day and all the next night, just going through, typing things in. And interestingly, for the next few years, I did science fair projects, and I would always find some project that I could do on the computer.
Yep.
So I
Nope.
did like a wildcat well drilling simulation. Texas Instruments had something called Extended Basic, which added sprites and sounds and additional things. So I did like I said, a wildcat well simulation. I did a missile guidance system, actually, using some math. I was able to project on the screen a trajectory of a missile. But I was also able to work with a neighbor next door, who he was an engineer, electrical engineer, and actually hooked up a remote controlled transmitter for a model airplane with a model rocket that was like I think it was like a Phoenix rocket, but turned that into a missile with fins that moved, and then you could actually control with a joystick the trajectory on the screen. So actually, that was a big science fair favorite.
No, I can see that one. No, I did the same thing, was use it for a number of years as part of different science fair projects and other projects, English school, school projects in English for, I think one of the fun science fair projects I did with a partner of mine, a good friend of mine, was pair up the Commodore PET with a set of switches and relays so that you could control, so you could use the switches and relays to control what was going on the system. And it involved, he was doing the hardware part and I was doing the software part. And again, that's a pattern that I think I see throughout the rest of my career.
Mm-hmm.
Was, I was partnering with people who were doing new hardware stuff, and I was trying to figure out the software side of the same thing.
So it was the maker community before Maker became
long
more
before,
mainstream.
Oh yeah. Actually, one of the fun things about the Commodore PET is that it had a number of these extra interfaces which were standard and well publicized amongst the science and engineering communities. So it had lots of people doing these weird sorts of things that could be plugged in, and therefore lots of documentation that was floating around about it. And that actually brings up another, issue that you and I have talked about when it comes to community. Was one of the great things about the Commodore community then was that it was a community. There were what we would call user groups then. Yep. And no, we couldn't get on, there was no internet, at least there was an internet, but not a very public one at that point. But there were mailing lists and newsletters that came out monthly that actually landed in your mailbox.
Yep.
What was going on. So there was this community that I was thrilled to be a part of.
Yeah, no, I joined the Texas Instruments, the 99ers, they called them. Yeah, and we went to, I think once a month, there was a Saturday you would meet for a couple of hours and demo the things that you were working on. That was back in with the dial-up modem to bulletin board days. Mm-hmm. So.
No, and the dial-up modem days, and what started getting into my venture into what I see as the internet, took place when I was in high school. I helped run a bulletin board system out of the school, and that, again, it was, what does a community look like, and what does a remote community look like, where you've got, some people that you see in person, and some people that you see less often or never that you're just communicating with online. And that was the stuff that I was doing with, with Apple IIs and Apple II Pluses and Apple IIe, and those were fun days when we, got the modem and started reaching out around the world and connecting with
Yep.
others and sharing that information faster.
Yeah, and the fun days that my other family members got to pick up the other receivers in the house and hear the
Yes.
like, oh, Mark's on the computer again.
Many times that happened. I remember those days well. Yes.
So into high school, is when I actually took my first programming class. I took a AP computer programming class, and it was Pascal.
Mm-hmm.
So I learned Pascal then, and then started college. And originally I was going to do electrical and computer engineering, and took another Pascal class because you had to take one at the college. But took 2 years off. I served a mission for my church in Brazil, and then when I came back, I kind of just rethought through what I wanted to do, and kind of put all the majors back up on the board and took a look at it and thought that I really wanted to understand business problems and how to solve business problems with computers. So I went into management information systems, and the only required programming class there was COBOL. And so I learned COBOL, and I actually did a summer internship between my junior and senior year up at Safeco Insurance in Seattle, programming COBOL, and decided that I wanted to do Windows programming instead. I did get a job offer that next year, but I decided I wanted to go into Windows programming. I also had taken a C++ class at college, and so that was kind of how my college years. What did you do?
So
programming-wise in college.
So like you in high school, I took AP Computer Science, and I kind of actually forced the issue a little bit with my district because they weren't terribly interested in. There were very few formal computing classes. Yeah. But again, the friend who assisted me with the electronics, and I convinced them for the computer teacher to tutor us specifically in it, and then to let us take the AP class. So I went into college with that kind of foundation. I had known for years that I wanted to major in computer science. That was almost no question for me. And in college, I did ROTC in the Air Force, so they were very happy to see people doing computer science work.
Right.
So I spent all 4 of my years doing computer science, learning a variety of different programming languages, mostly Pascal, but that's where I was exposed to C. C++ was brand new at the time, so we were just exploring that. A wide range of other languages, including Lisp and Scheme and all sorts of other specialty languages that were going on at the time as well. Mm-hmm. And during the break between my junior and senior year, I was in a shadow program for the Air Force. So I went to an Air Force base and was shadowing another officer and seeing what they were doing as part of, in the same career field. And that's where I was exposed to other languages like Ada and Modula 2 and Modula, and other stuff that's well known, but not so well known today. But it kind of exposed me to a lot of, here's a lot of different ways to do the same thing. And you don't need to pick one, you need to pick the one that's right for the task.
Right.
So coming out of college, I went into the Air Force and did computer work for the Air Force. And while I was in there, kind of looking at other hobbies, other side projects to do for fun, I was talking to a friend who was working at Xerox PARC at the time. And he said, you should check out this Mosaic project thing. So I looked at it and I said, oh, hey, this is cool. I can build something with this that I built in high school, an interactive text-based adventure game thing. So I built, I tried to do it, and I said, I'm having trouble getting started with this. It's not letting me do what I want. He goes, oh, you probably need a server. Go pick up a Linux server. And I'm like, what's Linux?
Yeah.
So he pointed me at Linux version 0.9. To give you an idea, just how long we're talking about here. And I got started with it and set up my first Apache server, and and got Mosaic working and set up my first website from there.
Yeah. Wow, that's fun. So in college, I took a SQL class. Actually, I was a TA for the database for one of the database professors in the business school, and my job was to help him reformat chapters in his SQL programming book and stuff. And that's when I got my first exposure to Microsoft SQL Server / Sybase SQL Server. And so going out of college, I ended up taking a job in Chicago with Arthur Andersen. They were one of the big tax firms, and I was going to write international tax software for them on what was called a 4GL language. So it was a forms creator that had programming behind the scenes and a SQL database. It was Gupta SQL Windows was my first program environment, but right out of the bat, I was doing hands-on programming, and I've stayed hands-on ever since. I went from there from my first job to my second job in Chicago because they actually moved to Florida within 6 months of me graduating from college. And didn't want to go down there, so I took another job, and we were doing Power Builder, and also that's where I got my first introduction to Visual Basic. So I did Visual Basic, and then it was time to move back west to, I'm from Utah, my wife's from Arizona. So we moved to Arizona, and I did some consulting with Visual Basic, and then that led into a little bit of web programming before .NET came out. And then when .NET came out, I went ahead and started doing C# and I did more either full-time job or consulting, kind of half and half depending on. But I worked up into an architecture position where I was doing back-end components for Microsoft web applications, doing a lot of classes and design patterns and things. So that's kind of how I got into the whole .NET Microsoft realm, which took me for a long time, since .NET began all the way to just a few years ago, when I was doing Microsoft stuff 100% of the time, whether it be mostly web, various incarnations of web or enterprise software, but also some Silverlight and Windows Phone.
Ooh, those were fun days.
Yeah, so and then that led into when I discovered voice and AWS stuff. So what about your career?
So in the Air Force, I had a number of interesting positions, and some of which were development positions using Ada and C++. And at one point, as I was in the middle of this web stuff personally, somebody said, "Hey, does anyone know what this web thing is? The general wants to know." So I got to do presentations for 1- and 3-star generals about what this web thing was, because nobody knew. So I was getting questions like, "Well, will this interface with our databases?" And I'm like, "We could make it interface with the database, but it doesn't by itself." So a lot of helping people just understand the basics. And during that time, I also got involved in computer security, which led me down a whole other path of, investigating security issues and vulnerabilities, and how do we, trust the networks and the computers that are on the networks, and how much trust do we place in them, and how much do we care about firewalls, and where should we trust firewalls. And in the middle of this time, Microsoft was launching their new browser, and Sun Microsystems was as part of this. There was a lot of concern about safety in the browser, and Microsoft had their solution, and Sun had their solution. And Sun's solution was this development environment called Java, and the big important thing about Java was that it would run in your browser securely, because it wasn't possible to have a number of security exploits, which were incredibly common at the time. And it was Java eliminated those exploits. So everyone was very excited about Java, and I started looking into it, and I started liking it as a language and doing more and more with it as a language. But back then we were mostly thinking of it as a browser language, not a server
Interesting.
language.
Yeah.
And it wasn't until after I got out of the Air Force and went to work for a small company in Houston that at the time nobody ever heard of, called Enron.
Oh,
Um,
Enron.
I spent a couple of years at Enron, that we started thinking about, well, okay, how can we use this language and the safety that we get from the language in the server or on server processes or something.
Mhm.
And after I left Enron, and I left Enron on my own terms, more or less, I went to work for the small consulting company that I work for now. And there I was mostly doing Java on the back end. And back then it was very early days of Java in the back end. So there weren't all of the same standards that we have today. So all of the inversion of control tools that we're used to today, and Spring didn't exist then. You know, when we
Yeah.
discovered Spring, it was pleasant because it was standardizing a lot of things that we were doing on our own in our own way, and finding a nice structure to do them in was refreshing in some ways.
Yes. I remember back when there weren't a lot of frameworks and libraries, and you just had to code everything yourself. And
Yeah.
that, that was a, no, Enron did energy trading, right?
Enron did energy trading, and well, they did everything trading, but mostly they were energy traders. So yeah, that was not a computer. I wasn't in the computer industry. I was doing computer work, and it was IT work that was supporting higher ups, and it was dealing with databases and exchanging information and extracting information uh, from private data feeds. You know, so we would have a constant ticker on what energy prices were
Mhm.
in certain markets, and we needed to do something with that.
Well, interestingly, I had a like a 2-3 year consulting job at APS, which is Arizona Public Service, which is energy provider here in Arizona, and the team that I worked for was the energy trading team. So we would have to keep track of different capacity, electric
Mm-hmm.
capacity on different lines from point A to point B to point C. So having all those different segments in and figuring out which segments have which value and where it goes up and down. And we have lots of reservoirs actually here with different power plants, and we have one nuclear plant here in Arizona. But it was all about trying to find excess capacity so we could sell it off to other places.
Oh, so it was all about excess capacity, not balancing capacity to make sure
Yeah,
your lines weren't overloaded, and
yeah. So
fun stuff. Those are
yeah,
challenging times in a lot of ways.
a lot of fun database problems, and trying to figure out how to do queries that would grab particular segments or whole uh, systems of lines all the way from one point to another point.
Mm-hmm. A lot of what we were doing at the time was trying to get energy information. So while there were a lot of newsletters that were out there that were publishing, here's what the average spot price was on the markets yesterday in oil or in gas or in various other things, most of these newsletters saw themselves as newsletters. So when we asked for, can we get electronic information of your data, they would do things like send us a PDF every day by email. And we're like, no, we need the numbers. And they're like,
Need
well,
access to the data, not the
why?
report.
Right. And they're like, why do you need the numbers? And we're like, because that's what we're basing our decisions on. That's what
Right.
we're basing our pricing on. The contracts that we're settling are based on that number right there in your newsletter. And a lot of them didn't realize that that's how valuable their data was.
It's all about the data. Yeah.
And I mean, when we told them, we're settling contracts based on that number, they're like, you're doing what? Why would you, why are you trusting this number? And we're like, because it's the only number out there. You know, what other choice do we have?
Yeah.
So it was very surprising to see that, you know, a lot of these companies didn't realize what they had or how valuable their data was, or how people were using their data even.
Yeah, like that's then you go into the whole world of you know, when they're trying to make more like web services and discoverability of web services, and you know, whole XML chunk of my career was understanding and being able to parse and create XML.
And you were, I'm sure you were playing with things like SOAP and
Yep.
you know, advertising schemas and parsing the advertising of schemas.
Yep. WSDL, and yeah, so more of a formal web service, and that kind of broke into Rust. So that was, Rust was kind of this thing where we were using the basic HTTP you know, web protocols that we had before for APIs, but in some ways it was it was a little bit of a backlash against all the formality and you know, the pain and time it took to do more formal web services. Then Rest was like, oh, look, I could quickly spin up some web services following protocols, and you can do your CRUD stuff through APIs, and you know.
I'll just tell you what, you know, what the endpoints look like, and yeah, you can trust my documentation.
Yeah. So yeah, so that was and interestingly enough, you know, recently that's kind of broken too, with the whole group of people that are wanting to do things like GraphQL. So where you can build your query into the request that you do, and that determines not only what data you get back, but you know, how much and what joins and things that happen with that. So it's just interesting how things evolve, and in some cases there's like an attempt to be really super formal about things, but then sometimes it's like, oh, you know,
yeah,
you know, I've done SQL for a long time, and now there's the whole NoSQL movement, and
but then
either document databases or things. Yeah.
To me, the whole NoSQL movement is, and this one goes back to my college. My original database textbook, the textbook I had on database, only covered SQL in about a quarter of it. The rest of it were things like, you know, what is a document database and what is a network database, and, you know, describing other kinds of databases. So to me, I'm reading about this whole NoSQL movement, and I'm like, we were there 30 years ago, 40 years ago. You look at traditional IBM databases, and that's what they were.
Yeah. Well, you know, and we had to go through the whole series thing where networking came out, right? Where we had to say, is this a star network? Is this a ring network? Is it a and we just don't worry about
we don't worry about network
anymore.
Topologies anymore.
Yeah. You didn't have to physically connect one computer to another computer. Right. You just connect things to the internet. And
well, I think also what I enjoy about knowing all that stuff, and I'm sure the people who came before me would say the same thing about the technologies that they worked with. There would be, you know, they would be like, oh, I'm glad I wrote my own compiler for this language, because it taught me valuable skills in memory management and data structures and doing all of these other things that you guys, you youngsters don't understand these days. And I'm like, you know, and I'm glad I did a lot of low-level system administration, that I had, you know, that I was working with Linux from version 0.9, that I was, you know, responsible for writing code that was reading network packets and understanding network packets. I'm glad I understand that, because now it helps me understand a whole host of things and be able to explain, this is why we need to represent this using 64 bits, because 32 bits is just gonna, you're not gonna have enough memory space.
Right.
You know, I'm glad I have that, but I also am glad that I don't have to subject somebody else to all of that.
I don't have to, yeah, there's the fact that I don't have to worry about so much and I can focus on the software development part of things. I very much like in the fact that there's lots more libraries and frameworks
Yeah.
out there. Just makes things a lot easier. I had an intern this last summer that was working with us, and it was fun just to kind of explore what she was taught. And she had one programming experience, I think, before. She did a great job with us, but it was fun to understand what she had learned and try to fill in some of the blanks, like understanding that HTTP is a request response model, and and just kind of explain, when you make a request to a web browser, then you're getting back this document, plus you're getting back links that are pulling other things down like images and stuff, and then trying to relate that to voice programming, just to really understand, this round trip that you're getting. It's a simple request response. You get a JSON request in, you get a JSON response back out, and but a lot of that stuff, that background isn't being taught, and I think it's important to understand just the basics of how things go.
Well, I think it's useful, but I think it's also something that most people, in a lot of ways, kind of take for granted and kind of, assume. At one point, I tried to explain to somebody, here's what's happening, and here's, the request, and here's the response, and they just gave me this like, yeah, of course, and what's your point here? I'm like, oh, you get it, and you get it without having to understand, these are in the headers, and this is in the body, and this is what I have to send back, and you get it. You don't need the fine details in a lot of ways. And in some ways that's, and again, I'm glad that it's there because it does make development life easier. And I'm also glad that I know those details.
Yeah, well, I remember an experience that I had. This was my second job out of college when I was still in Chicago, and we were doing some things and it was on Windows, and so Power Builder had a form builder built into it, but there was something that it wasn't quite working, and you could get down to the Windows event level on different things, and so I asked a coworker, and she's like, "Oh well, let's try this," and then she gets down to the point where she's sending a message off with a W param and an L param, and I'd done a little bit of reading with Windows programming, and so I knew kind of what she was doing, but I'm like, well, how did you know to do that? She goes, oh, it just seemed like it would make sense, and so I tried that, and it worked, and it seemed like magic to me. And so I think there is something about understanding the history of things, so that when you get to a certain point, that you understand really what's going on, so that you can solve an issue that to somebody else might seem like magic, but it's just because you understand some things that they haven't had to understand at that point yet.
Now, I don't think we finished our developer history stories yet. I know that for me, I've been in this job for ages, but I think a big part of where I am now is shaped by the fact that, about 8 or 9 years ago, I got involved in Google Plus. And as part of that, started digging under the covers of what was a consumer product, but they had APIs for it. So I started digging into those APIs. And as part of that, that's what led me down the path to be invited to I/O and to becoming a Google developer expert. Yep. And because I went to I/O that year, I got involved in Glass. And because I got involved in Glass, I got involved in a whole new community of what was interesting for Glass and really exciting for Glass was I got involved in a community of both a bunch of creatives, people who were looking to use Glass in innovative ways, but who were not developers, and a bunch of developers who were interested in exploring what a new form factor was going to look like. And watching these two very different, in some cases, groups work together was really fun and exciting. And that's really what led me, I trace a direct line from my involvement with Glass and helping the community learn how to develop in Glass and writing a book about Glass and starting out on Stack Overflow and talking about Glass and doing YouTube presentations on Glass. And, all of that to me was the direct line from there to where I am now in doing this, doing this podcast and helping on SO and writing documentation and helping people understand not just how to develop for voice, but help them see the potential. Help those
Right.
creatives say, here's, it's weird using the term vision when we're talking about voice, but see the
Yeah.
vision for voice and what new and innovative things we can do with voice. And I think that was really what set me on that path.
Yeah, so my path on voice started in 2016 when I discovered that Alexa existed. I hadn't heard anything about it. It'd been out probably about a year, and you could program for it. So I discovered that you could, and I started looking at it, and I'm like, well, I've got JavaScript programming experience from when I've done my web programming. I've done a little bit of Node, but I didn't understand Node all that much. I didn't have any experience at all with Amazon Web Services or Lambda or serverless or any of the stuff that I'm doing now. But I just started learning, and I jumped in and got really excited about it and started sharing things on GitHub. I wanted other people that were following behind me to have a little bit easier time than I did.
Mm-hmm.
And that led to like speaking locally at conferences and starting the Phoenix Alexa meetup, which turned into being selected as Alexa's champion that next spring. And that led to a job, my first startup experience. I was a co-founder of VoiceXP and the technical person behind the scenes doing all the different skills that we were doing with clients or that demos for pre-sales things. So I did that for just over a year. And then I had a little lull in the voice community. I couldn't find anything. I took a consulting job for about 8 months doing just web programming, and then I found this other job, this other startup at Soar. I've been here about a year and a half, but just have really enjoyed taking the things that I've learned. So a lot of the samples that you get show all the intents in one file and your response text to speech right there as a string in your code coming back. And I knew from all of my enterprise experience in consulting that projects, you need teams of people to work on bigger projects, and you need to be able to structure things in a way that you encapsulate things and you move things into services and you unit test. And so all of that's the discipline and stuff that I've learned over the years of doing, my Microsoft development as a consultant or full-time employee just kind of kicked in and thought, okay, we need to step this up and find ways to apply this to voice.
No, I know exactly what you mean. I still work for Objective Consulting. I still help clients out, and a lot of what we do is helping clients with web and mobile stuff, and that's most of my day job. With occasional questions like, so what is this voice thing? Yeah. Just like decades ago, I had, what is this web thing? And beginning to help them get into it. But one of the things I very quickly realized was the same as you, is, we're showing examples that are just returning strings. And I'm thinking, back when I did HTML, the first program we did was we wrote programs to send back chunks of HTML. And really quickly, we learned that was a bad approach. I started saying, well, what are, since then we have learned about templates and we've learned about other structures, and how can we apply those lessons to voice? Yes. And that's where I started going with multivocal, is saying, okay, what will templates, what will the React of voice look like or feel like? Mm-hmm. What will the Angular of voice feel like? And I don't know that multivocal is it, but I know that multivocal is at least a step closer than what we had, than the examples the companies are giving us.
Yeah, and exactly. And it was this this, I guess, need that I had to solve cross-platform that
Mm-hmm.
led me ultimately to Jovo, which led me to, you know, speech markdown
Markdown.
as you know, SSML had different flavors for different platforms. So yeah, trying to solve these problems in ways that would be cross-platform, and so that's kind of how I've arrived at
Mm-hmm.
my current code stack is just from, you know, the experiences that I've had over the years.
Well, I think that's it. Is that, you know, and I think that's why we wanted to do this, have this conversation. Is that, you know, it's our experiences that over the years that led us to shape the exact path that we're on now, and, you know, to say, here's why we think this is maybe not the best approach, but it's heading towards the best approach.
Yep.
You know, this is, and I'm sure, you know, companies like Jovo and you know, the companies like VoiceFlow, their unique experiences were what led them to develop those tools as well. Yes. Because their background said there's got to be a better way, and maybe this is the better way.
Yeah, it is interesting just how we've gotten you know, different backgrounds in a lot of ways. You know, yours went through the military and you know, Linux servers, and you develop on a Mac, and I develop on Windows. You know, a little bit of exposure. It's funny. I have a sophomore in college, and he's a math major, and you know, he built his own, you know, server, and he's always telling me about different things about Linux, and I'm just so excited that he gets to explore something that interests him, and well, you know, and that's going to help shape where he goes with his career.
And I think that's what's really great about our industry in general, is that we've got people who are building tools, and in some level, we're the ones also building those tools to help people do and explore the things that matter to them, that they care about. That this technology is, we're making it as open as possible. We're giving people the choice to explore things on their terms rather than on our terms. Because I mean, when you and I got started, mainframes were still the dominant factor, you know, and that was definitely exploring things on someone else's terms.
Yep, reel-to-reel tape or 8-inch floppies.
Right. You know, and it was this notion that we've got now communities. You know, we had communities sort of supporting us then, but now we've got communities for almost any combination of what you want to learn. Mm-hmm. You'll find communities that are out there who are rooting for you, who are out there wanting to help you succeed. And I think both of us, in the tools that we build, in the answers we provide, in the, you know, it's the nature of why you're a champion and why I'm a GDE, is that we want to be helping people do awesome stuff.
Yeah, so love to share, you know, my experiences with others, just to be as helpful as possible, and I like learning from other people as well. It's just
you know, one of the things when people ask me, why are you doing this presentation? Why are you telling us all? Why are you giving away these answers? And my answer is, you know, I love this technology. I really want to see it succeed, and the only way it's going to succeed is if we have a huge number of really awesome things out there, and I can't do them all. I can't write every action that I want to write, and then I can't write it as a skill either. We need other people doing awesome stuff, having the awesome ideas, trying the awesome things out, and sometimes succeeding, sometimes failing. Whatever, it always pushes us forward. So, you know, and I think this is one of the things that I want to encourage anyone who's watching and listening to this is, if you've got questions, ask them, because, you know, we want to help you succeed. If you've got ideas, even if you don't know how to do it, we want to help you figure out how to do it. And there are tons and tons of others who are out there as well who also want to help you do it.
Yeah, totally. So we're here to help. We are Two Voice Devs.
Two Voice Devs.
But we would love to have any other devs come join us in this adventure, just with what you're doing. So thank you.
We'd love to hear what you're doing. Take care, everyone.
Bye-bye.